So in November of last year, Governor Scott Walker and a majority Republican Congress in Wisconsin, and shortly after in January, they approved tax cuts for multinational out-of-state corporations. The following few weeks in early February, they declared a budget crisis. And as a plan to approach this budget crisis, Governor Scott Walker introduced a finance bill, which would rewrite decades of history in Wisconsin by eliminating public collective bargaining rights for many public employees, and also cut pay and cut pensions and cut benefits for many public employees. This was received to much outcry by the public of Wisconsin, and there were marches upon the State House in Madison. The Democratic Senate leaders, realizing that for a financial bill to pass in Wisconsin, they would have to have a quorum, decided to leave the state in order to block the passage of this bill. They were called the Wisconsin 14. And they left to Illinois. And for several weeks in Wisconsin, there were many mass demonstrations in Madison, and they were also matched by demonstrations that happened in other U.S. cities and in Europe. Most notably in Europe, where about a week and a half ago, there was a mass demonstration of around 500,000 people against austerity cuts in England. And then on March 9th, a very notable thing happened, where in a somewhat backroom meeting at night, all of the financial measures were stripped from the bill, making it just a bill about collective bargaining rights and union issues. And in that way, they did not need a quorum that they would have needed with the financial measures inside of it. The next day it was voted on, and it passed and was signed by Governor Walker on March 11th. Right now, as we stand, the bill has been issued a restraining order by Dane County Judge Sumi. And that is where we stand. It's in the legal realm right now to understand whether the open meeting law was violated in the state of Wisconsin. With that in mind, I'd like to turn the floor over to our great orators. I'm so glad that they've decided to speak today. And first we'll have Buzz Eisenberg.
I teach American Civil Liberties here at GCC. And I'm here, I think I was invited to amplify the view that the issue that brings us together isn't just an issue of contract rights. It's an issue of constitutional importance, which, like all constitutional issues, involves interpreting key provisions of the U.S. Constitution to decide where our values really lie as Americans. I'd like to briefly look at a previous time when workers' rights were contested and when the Constitution was invoked. By 1933, West Coast dock workers felt a growing desperation with the harshness of the Great Depression and a rising anger at the danger and the indignity of working conditions ensued. With the National Industrial Recovery Act, for the first time, Congress actually recognized and codified the right to organize and to bargain collectively for all people. But on the West Coast, budding union activity led to great resistance from the owners and from the police who protected the owners' interests. And there were pitched battles over the right to collectively bargain, which resulted in injuries and even deaths up and down the West Coast. These battles eventually culminated in the largest general strike in U.S. history, and it was led by the International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union, and it finally resulted in 1934 in a victory for the strikers. Those dock workers won control first of their hiring halls in 1934, and then they fought to create a union open to all races, and then to all religions and all political leanings. And then they argued for safer working conditions, and eventually they secured health care benefits, and they established pensions and paid holidays and vacations, and they took public stands on a wide range of issues that impact American workers, and workers throughout the world for that matter. Many spoke of it as a victory for the National Industrial Recovery Act, but many others recognized it as a victory for the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, the right to freely assemble with whomever you choose. It was and remains a victory for the right to free expression, including the right to join others in your own workplace to discuss your view about how to make the workplace safer or more satisfying, and how to make the compensation you're paid more fairly reflect your work contribution. Those efforts are, and they should be, protected, not just as contract rights, but as constitutionally guaranteed rights. Those guarantees that government will not interfere with your ability to exercise your right to advocate, along with others, for your own life and your own liberty and your own property. In 1945, a case called Thomas versus Collins, in which the president of the United Auto Workers was sentenced to jail for trying to organize workers, came before the United States Supreme Court. And the court ruled that his right to speech and his right to assembly were to be reviewed using what's called the preferred freedoms test, meaning that those rights are so core, so intrinsic to our idea of a free society that without them, we're not even close to the country that we aspire to be. And that as a result, they enjoyed a preferred status to other rights that are articulated in the Constitution. And there's no better example of the importance of those rights than the fact that we're gathered here today, assembling peaceably, freely expressing ourselves. Who is to tell us today, right now, with whom we should assemble, or why, or what we should be able to say? The right to join others and collectively bargain should not be a right afforded only to certain people. That is an American right, to be enjoyed by each and by every individual in our society. Those Wisconsin workers, they demand it. Our Constitution, it demands it. And we should demand it as well.
So next we'll have Rosemary Freeland.
I'm Rosemary Freeland, and I coordinate our Women's Resource Center here at GCC. I want to thank Sam for recognizing that the assault on collective bargaining in Wisconsin is an assault on workers everywhere. If you don't know, today is a National Day of Action. We are one. Labor unions, civil rights organizations, students, we all stand together to shine a light like Dr. King did 43 years ago on April 3rd in Memphis, Tennessee, on similar human rights and human dignity for working women and men. I want to share these words from Dr. King. The labor movement was the principal force that transformed misery and despair into hope and progress. Out of its bold struggles, economic and social reform gave birth to unemployment insurance, old age pensions, government relief for the destitute, and above all, new wage levels that meant not mere survival, but a tolerable life. The captains of industry did not lead this transformation. They resisted it until they were overcome. Along with being the coordinator of the Women's Resource Center here at GCC, I'm also a former chapter president of the local faculty and professional staff union here at GCC, called the Greenfield Community College Professional Association, which is an affiliate of the Massachusetts Community College Council, the NEA, which is the National Education Association, and the MTA, the Massachusetts Teachers Association. I'm also an executive committee on the MCCC. The mission statement of the MCCC ties access to and quality of education in our Massachusetts community colleges. We, the faculty and professional staff at the 15 community colleges of the Commonwealth of Mass, have organized into a politically active union to protect the professional rights and advance the economic well-being and working conditions of our members, as well as maintain and improve the quality of education in our community colleges. Let me emphasize that. As well as to maintain and improve the quality of education in our community colleges. I work with some amazing professionals who keep students in the forefront all the time. Our needs as professionals and the needs of students are inseparable. Among our objectives, to engage in collective bargaining, which includes the right to a mutually agreed upon grievance process. Recently, the statewide union has faced an unprecedented challenge by our employer. The community college presidents have been instructed by their attorneys to usurp our grievance process. They've gone to the courts and they've asked for the courts to issue injunctions to stay our grievance process so that we can't move forward in good faith, move forward with due process that we've agreed upon to resolve some of the differences that we have. Again, this is unprecedented. I do have one of our MCCC newsletters that you're welcome to come and take that speaks to the assault on collective bargaining in this way. Another of our objectives is to improve salary and benefits. The last time I and my colleagues within the community college system in Massachusetts received a salary increase was in July of 2008. In 2009, we bargained a 3-year contract which included humble, very humble increases. At the same time, we were faced with increases in our health insurance premiums and co-pays. Because of the recession, we were asked by our employer to delay our raises. We agreed in good faith. On June 30th, 2011, 2 years and 364 days since our last raise, we will see a very slight increase. However, our June 30th, 2012 raise, which we again bargained for in good faith back in 2009, is not yet in the House budget. We promote equitable employment conditions for part-time unit professionals and adjunct faculty. I don't know if you know this, but approximately 65% of our faculty here at GCC and across the community college system in Massachusetts are adjunct faculty. Part-time faculty, sometimes called freeway flyers. They often they often have to eke out a living as community college professors by traveling the Route 91 corridor between Greenfield and Springfield Technical Community College. Some go east to Mount Wachusett. I'd like to draw your attention to a Globe ad of 2 months ago that speaks to the conditions, the working conditions of our adjunct faculty, who again are teaching more than 65% of our classes, but who do not have the same benefits that other state employees have. For example, health insurance. So a couple of years ago, Massachusetts passed a law that everyone should be having health insurance. Employers should be paying for the health insurance and provide health insurance benefits to their employers. Our adjunct faculty do not have that right. The MCCC and the MTA are challenging that in the courts on behalf of our adjunct faculty. They don't have the same pension or retirement rights that we as full-time workers in the Massachusetts system have. We promote livable and equitable and competitive wages. I want to give a little bit of a personal story now, and that is I am a proud alum of GCC. In 1993, I came to GCC as a single mom of 3 kids, and I was on welfare. So in the 1990s, the nation was engaged in an attack on welfare recipients. The rhetoric bashing welfare recipients was similar to the rhetoric we've heard about public workers. Lazy, bomb eating leeches, gorging themselves on the taxpayers' hard-earned wages. I was told then, in the 1990s, welfare reform is necessary to balance the budget. As a public worker, I'm told now, it's necessary to strip you of your right to collectively bargain with your colleagues in order for us to balance our state and federal budgets. I say in conclusion, and to quote Dr. King again, in memory of his assassination 43 years ago, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects me directly affects us all indirectly.
So next we're going to have Tully Fitzsimmons, and then after Tully we'll have an open discussion.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tully Fitzsimmons. I teach economics here at the school, chair the business department, and I also serve as the treasurer of the GCCPA, which is one of the unions representing faculty here at the school. Sam began by speaking about some of the issues that were taking place in Wisconsin. But I want to make it clear that what's happening in Wisconsin is not just happening in Wisconsin. That's what's getting all the media attention. But the attack on public employee unions, on the right to negotiate the terms of one's employment, are taking place in state capitals in almost every state in the union. In my home state of New Hampshire, just last week, the House adopted a budget, and without public hearings, so this is also going to court, snuck in a provision that was almost identical to the Wisconsin provision within the budget bill, and passed it. The Senate probably will not adopt it, and if it does, the governor will probably not sign it, but it was an attempt to do exactly the same thing very quickly. So as a result, what I'm about to speak on today is I'm going to try and give you an economic justification, not just for unions, but for public employee unions specifically. And the contents of what I'm going to present today are posted on a blog site called bluehampshire.com. I live in New Hampshire. It's a progressive blog, and I'm one of the bloggers on that blog. Many people, and you'll hear people say, especially when it comes to public employees, firefighters, police, teachers, other office workers, health human services workers, that they don't need unions because we no longer have dangerous working conditions like people working in mills or in coal mines. We don't experience that. That we receive better wages and benefits than the average working person. So why should we be supporting unions that simply, pad our compensation packages? And they will say, and they're not incorrect in this, that taxpayers generally do not have a choice in paying the bill, because if you refuse to purchase the government service, there are repercussions for it. So why should public employees of all people have this right to unionize and advocate for wages and benefits and due process bargaining rights and things like that? Well, the easiest way for me to approach this, especially from an economic perspective, is to rely on structures and mechanisms that we're all familiar with, and then make an analogy. So I'll start with something that I talk about in almost every single class: coffee. Everyone who's ever had me knows that we hear about coffee from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester. Every semester, I ask my students to write down on a piece of paper what they would expect to pay for a cup of coffee, 12 or 16-ounce cup of coffee, if they were driving somewhere in this country and they were stopping at a coffee shop or a gas station that they had never been to before in their life. What would they expect to pay? In every semester, with maybe one exception, an entire class of 30 students will write a number between $1 and $2. The vast majority of them between $1.25 and $1.75. Sometimes it goes beyond. And I do that exercise because I'm trying to point out that we all have a certain expectation of about what is right or fair for a cup of coffee. If you walked into a gas station and they were charging you $5, you would turn around and walk out. If they were charging 25 cents, you might buy it. You might suspect how many days it's been sitting in the pot on the burner before you actually bought it. There are many producers of coffee, many suppliers of coffee, many purchasers of coffee, and much information in the marketplace about what it is that consumers expect and what it is suppliers can expect to receive for that cup of coffee. In economic parlance, we call that perfect competition. We have many suppliers, many producers, a lot of information. The market works. There's no government law that says coffee must be sold at $1.50. Coffee can't be sold for more than $3. Doesn't exist. It's simply a product of the interaction of forces in the marketplace. That happens in certain markets for certain products. But that is not the case for all markets and all products. When there is an imbalance in bargaining power, when there's an imbalance in the number of producers or the number of consumers of a good, a concept called market structure comes into play. And what I'd like to do is introduce you to this concept. And again, if you've had me, you're familiar with the chicken farmer exercise. I'd like you to imagine a situation. Yeah, you can tell I've raised children. I would like you to imagine a situation where at the bottom of this supply chain of chicken to the consumer, you have a series of chicken farmers. Each one of these boxes representing a chicken farmer raising his chickens and then selling them to a processor who chops them up and renders them and puts them in nice styrofoam and plastic packages, because that's how we think chickens are born, in styrofoam packages. And then they take these nicely packaged, processed, chlorinated chickens and sell them to a series of supermarkets: Price Chopper, Hannaford's, Big Y, A&P, Stop and Shop, Shaw's, and all the rest. But I want you to notice that I only put one processor in here, a single processor. And let's imagine for a second that there really is only one processor of chickens, so that every farmer has to sell their chickens to this one processor. And every supermarket has to get their finished packaged chicken from this one processor. When you have a series of consumers, but there's only one place they can get their product from, just one producer of the product, you all know what the name of that market structure is. What do we call that? Okay, so up here we have a monopoly relationship between the processor and the supermarkets. The supermarkets can say, we'd like to buy chicken from you. The processor can say, well, this is the price we're charging. Take it or leave it. If you want chicken, what are you going to do about it? You're going to pay the price. And anyone who's ever paid monopoly prices, anyone who's ever cursed out their electric bill because they thought it was too high and they couldn't switch to another producer of electricity, knows the situation. In this case, the price is going to be higher to the supermarkets and higher to the ultimate consumer. But what we often don't look at is what's happening at the bottom of this chain here, because we're usually the consumer at the other end. At the bottom of the chain, we've got a series of chicken farmers, all of whom are forced to sell their good to one processor. That processor is able to say, we'll give you 25 cents a chicken. If you don't like it, what are you going to do about it? And in this case, the farmer has no other alternative. So what happens to the prices at that end of the chain? Prices at this end of the chain are depressed down. And if you like technical terms, that's what we call a monopsony. It's a word that we don't use as frequently as the word monopoly in our discussions. But it has the opposite effect. Rather than raising prices, it lowers prices. I think we all realize how ridiculous it would be if the people at the end, the supermarkets, or the end consumers, in complaining about their high prices, complained about the farmers who started the chain. And yet when it comes to public employees, that's exactly what some groups are doing. When you have this imbalance of power, and I made this processor extremely powerful here, there are two ways to address this issue. The first way is to break up the processor, and that's what the whole purpose of antitrust law is about. When you have a single producer or a single supplier of a good, antitrust law enables the government to break up that company into several so that competition ensues. The other alternative is to increase the market power or the bargaining power of the people at the bottom of the chain. That's what many farmers' cooperatives are. And in fact, if any of you have had any cranberry juice recently, you probably know that most cranberry farmers, especially in Massachusetts, have entered into a cooperative arrangement so that rather than having to sell their cranberries individually to processors, they have band together and created Ocean Spray, which is a farmers' cooperative that enables them to have the market power to negotiate with supermarkets and end users and get a price that enables them to stay in business. So now what I'd like to do is get rid of my chickens and put in some public employees. There we go. And I'm keeping the monopoly and monopsony words there, and I'm keeping the price differentials there. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about firefighters working for a city who sells through taxation that service to people. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about students purchasing educational services from an institution that then hires labor. We have the same basic structure in place. And I want to focus on this structure right here. If you see the bottom row as your public employees, they are selling something of value. They're selling their labor to what is a monopsony employer. You can't break up efficiently government. You can't have 3 different state trooper posts in one town. You're not going to have 6 competing registry of deeds and you have your choice of which place to file your mortgage. You're not going to have 4 different fire departments deciding who's going to race and get to the fire first in our city. It doesn't happen. What you have is a single government administration, a monopsony purchaser of labor. Given that, the ability to create equal bargaining power, is no longer as wide as it is in the private sector, where breaking up the business, breaking up the corporation is a possibility. The only possibility to enable equal bargaining power so that the price or the wage is not depressed is to enable a collective voice at this end. You're not going to break up government. What you can do is make sure that each individual is not standing out on their own at the whim of whatever the administration decides to do. It's even more complicated by the fact that in the private industry, if an employer employs someone and there's an employee contract and they violate it, there may be a lawsuit possible. That's far less possible with public employees who, as Rose indicated earlier, are subject to the legislature approving a contract even after it's agreed to and several years later is not even funded, or who decide to change the terms through an act of the legislature. I would suggest that rather than what you're hearing, and that is that public employee unions seem to be less necessary than in the private sector, they're probably more necessary than in the private sector, because there is no other corrective mechanism for the power imbalance. So, basic market structure, microeconomics 101, apply to what public employees and how they have to react with a much stronger market player. It doesn't make any more sense for taxpayers to complain about public employees organizing than it does for consumers to complain about farmers for the price of chicken, when there is someone in between who is directing the prices in both directions.
So I want to thank you all for coming here today. I want to thank our great speakers, and I'd like to open it up for open discussion. And I hope that people have some comments that they'd like to bring forth. Please.
I do have a bunch of things to say, but first, to forgive my ignorance, exactly what do they mean by taking away collective bargaining rights? No, they can't take away a right to congregate. They can't take away a right to all decide to do something. So what is this right exactly that they're trying to take away?
Mike, let me give you a very specific example, and this is the New Hampshire situation right now. When, can I stand up? Public employees in New Hampshire have a contract that they negotiated into with state government that contains something called an evergreen clause. An evergreen clause specifically says when the contract comes up for renewal, if the two sides, we both agree, if the two sides haven't agreed to the terms of the next contract, then the old terms carry forward until such a time as we do. The state legislature, through law, specifically took the right to agree for the state and employees to agree to have an evergreen clause. They made that illegal. Can't do it. So, if we get to the end of a contract in New Hampshire and the two sides have not agreed, not only do the contractual provisions not extend, anything you negotiated is now void. Everyone becomes, it can be terminated at will. It's gone. So, in other words, there's a right that's taken away. The right to negotiate an evergreen clause would now no longer be there in state law. Couldn't do it. So that's a very specific example. But it could also be you have no right to negotiate health care benefits. The legislature's telling you that you will have them, you won't have them, you'll pay 50%, or whatever it happens to be. It's the right to negotiate the terms of your employment that's being taken away.
Okay, so, all right, I guess part of what I'm feeling is that so basically what's being taken away is the bureaucracy in between all the things that people have fought for, but workers still have the right to get together and talk about it and say, we're going to stop working. And that was the original power.
No, we don't, as public workers, we cannot strike. It's against the law. We cannot strike. Teachers and public employees like firefighters and police officers can't strike because your safety would, as a public, and my safety as a public citizen, would also be in danger.
So if we were to, so recognizing that collective bargaining laws are regulated, right? So in Massachusetts, we have Chapter 150E, which is the collective bargaining law for state employees. And so think about other laws that our government has clarified for us in relationship to our right to assemble, right? So there's probably lots of law out there, right, Buzz? Clarifying that, and so Massachusetts said, okay, we recognize that for some faculty and staff in the university and community college system and our K through 12 teachers and educational support professionals, the Massachusetts Teachers Association, the Massachusetts Community College Council are certified to be the bargaining agents for that class of people, for that group of people. If you take that away, if Chapter 150E was to be repealed, then our rights to have the MCCC or the MTA or AFSCME for some of our other union brothers and sisters here at GCC would be taken away. And the employer would then be able to say, I'm not recognizing any of those agreements that you came to together in the past.
I'm not recognizing you as a group.
Correct. Right.
You're not a group. You're just Rose, Julie, Ann.
And so conversely, so we've got an evergreen clause issue happening you know, in New Hampshire. In
12 miles away.
In Massachusetts, there's also legislation around evergreen clause, and that is to do the reverse, and that is to recognize in the state of Massachusetts that the legislators will recognize agreed upon evergreen clauses. And we want us to support that effort in Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Please.
Yeah, I'm not anti-labor whatsoever. In fact, I'm one of the hardest workers I know when I'm employed. I'm currently not. But, I mean, I'm back in college, and, you know, I paid full price to be here, so I feel like I'm a customer in a business relationship with GCC, and I have that perspective. And I enjoyed today, and I want to thank everybody who spoke, and we're all very passionate about it. But like, what was kind of bugging me, this is a teach-in, and I'm a student, and I'm paying to be here, but I expect critical thinking, and I would have liked to have been the other side, so that I could choose to come up with my own conclusions about this whole situation, because there is more than one perspective. There is more than just the union perspective, my labor perspective, and I don't think Naval Patrick is evil, and I think that there are very real reasons. And I decided with labor in Wisconsin. I've been very clear with that, but I think that there are actual pragmatic reasons why the governor of Wisconsin is trying this out. I don't believe that the GOP as a group is moral, but I think the Tea Party is. So I would like to have heard both sides here, because I'm in an academic setting, and I want to be a critical thinker, and I want to see critical thinkers support it. So with that as my frame, you, sir, the professor of American Civil Liberties, where in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, is the right to collectively bargain?
Stems from the First Amendment. By the way, I applaud your
Thank you.
previous comments. I think that's wonderful, and we all want to be critical thinkers. And it all stems from the First Amendment. And the act that I referred to when I spoke, and more importantly, the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, said that as a result of free assembly, freedom to congregate, like that gentleman was talking about, and speak, that workers are guaranteed the ability to form a collective bargaining unit, which just means when you can't negotiate anymore with the employer because he says, well, I'll just fire you and I'll hire somebody who's willing to do it. If workers want to get together as a group and say, no, our whole assembly line or our whole factory wants to get together, and we'll withhold our services. We're the skilled workers you need. The NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act, recognizes that there's a constitutional right to freely assemble and to freely speak. That's the source. And as a result of the NLRA, those guarantees were extended to everyone until public employees were sort of whittled out. And I think the other side's rationale, reasoning, which is as taxpayers, we're owed a special duty from those who work for us, because striking would impair our ability to put out fires or to police our streets or to teach our students who are paying good money for their education. And because of that, we'll carve out an exception and limit the rights of public employees to collectively bargain. Rose was talking about a collective bargaining unit that's formed among teachers or professors, and that unit is represented by a collective bargaining agent who speaks on behalf of all the unit members and negotiates. But if you the Constitution does speak to life, liberty, and property interests and guarantees it. That's an elevated set of rights. Property includes what I'm paid, my mortgage, my car payments, my groceries, what I'm paying for my services. So I think the source is constitutional in nature. It's foundational. What I was trying to, it's a preferred freedom. The court says those are very special freedoms. There are some freedoms that are like second tiered, and there are some we can't do without. And so if there was somebody speaking for the other side, I'd love to hear what that person would say about the Constitution.
Is there anybody who would be willing to?
I have to go advise students because I wish I could stay here for.
I want to talk to the academic freedom clause too.
Is there anybody who would like to speak to the other side of the issue who believes that they could sum it up?
I think people are confused in this country. They think that there's no money, that there's, maybe the economics professor can help here. They think there's no money in this country and that the country's broke, which is not true. There's a lot of money in this country. It's just that we don't have it. They, Governor Walker in Wisconsin gave a $137 million tax break to corporations and wealthy individuals, and then turned around and declared a $120 million deficit.
Yeah.
So it's not like there isn't any money. And people get confused and they start thinking, oh, well, you know, we got to bust these unions because we don't have any money in our state treasuries and stuff. It's not true. There's a lot of money in this country. And it seems to me it's just a matter of distribution of wealth.
Well, do you, is there anybody who would sum up what the effort is, other than the difference between public and private money, where that's going, but who can sum up Governor Walker's idea of what's going on, of why he's doing this, in his rationale?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with, and Tony, clarify some of what I might say wrong, but free market economics. And that is that a worker will get paid what they're worth. And a lot of times we talk, we talk about this market structure now, where he said that it was going into, everybody's working for this one place, but other people will not look at it that way. And in fact, there are many employers. In fact, there are as many employers as there are people, since we also have the right to start businesses for ourselves. And so the problem is that now, not that all collective bargaining is wrong, but that now people are demanding certain wages in which that they will receive whether or not that individual has earned it. And so there's no incentive to improve, there's no incentives to get better. Instead, the incentive is to keep the status quo. The biggest thing right now is with education reform, and that many people are now coming to see that unions are actually the barrier to full education reform. And that has more to do with public elementary and high schools, and post-secondary schools. But
Speak, please.
I think that was a good summation of Governor Walker's point of view. I wanted to actually speak to the comments that were said earlier in support of the people who put those forth, and remind, I just wanted to say, well said, well spoken. It's good to have the notion that we have to be open-minded and questioning in all cases. And I think it's interesting to look historically at the genesis of unionism in this country, and to note one clear objective of the formation of unions, and actually one clear result in the formation of unions in this country, and that is the production of a living wage, which did not occur before unions were allowed to form. And that is a considerable advantage to life on this planet as we know it. I would also like to speak to the notion of corporate interests insofar as this whole idea of questioning, of seeking, of looking beyond the language is important enough for us to take a look at the recent Supreme Court decision that grants corporations the power of individuals. And if these languages happen in our lifetime, they're happening now, and they may seem subtle, but they're huge. These are huge changes in the life as we know it in this country. In the Mideast right now, there are people who are demanding with their lives the kind of independence and the kind of freedoms that we feel we enjoy without really contemplating them. Undermining those freedoms, I believe, is one of the issues involved when the Supreme Court can grant corporations the powers of an individual. It's what's in effect when we have states and governments saying, no, you can't assemble, you don't exist as an entity. Personal opinion.
I just wanted to add one other regulation. In 1941, the American Association of University Professors, not a union, but a professional group, established the principles of academic freedom. And from those principles, those kinds of freedoms are embedded in collective bargaining contracts that permit teachers and professional staff on this campus to have opinions, to state facts and opinions without fear of reprisal. And I personally think that that is extremely important in the classroom. Otherwise, we go down a pathway that you could be hearing only one side to many. So,
Slippery slope.
I continue to think about Massachusetts kind of as the bedrock of public education, and how important is it? And as Beth was alluding to, what we take for granted in this country, the freedoms that we take for granted. In public education, certainly kindergarten through 12th grade right now, is indeed a right, right? Higher education in Massachusetts, as well as other states, I think all other states, it's discretionary spending. There's no right to a public education. Funding for community colleges, universities, and the state colleges, which are now state universities in Massachusetts, have, in the past 10 years, the public support for us as institutions has decreased substantially. And so we're having to look to our fundraising arm, the GCC Foundation, to say, help us raise funds for student scholarships. Because we also know that funding for student scholarships, for Pell Grants, et cetera, that came in under the age of the civil rights movement, that said, our citizens, our residents of this country deserve to have a higher education. So when we look at the attacks on collective bargaining for public employees, and we look at the kinds of funding decreases that we see across the country, there are connections. When we see the kinds of discourse for our sister and brother K through 12 teachers who are being held to a particular standard and are being asked to no longer be involved in that conversation. You know, you can't sit at the table. Not only are you not invited to sit at the table to talk about ed reform, we're just going to do that to you. But you're now also not going to be able to sit at the table, potentially in Massachusetts, to discuss your health insurance. We're just going to do that for you. So what does it mean when our right to sit at the table is taken away? It's an assault on our democracy. It's an assault on what it is that our founders, you know, that Dr. Martin Luther King fought for in terms of our freedoms.
Just to follow up on what Rose said, in 1978, the legislature provided 95% of GCC's budget. Today, it's less than 50%. Also, if we didn't have unions, those of us who are fortunate enough to have weekends would not have weekends. And another point that hasn't been mentioned is that almost without exception, the states that have been most viciously attacking unions are being led by Republican governors and the House of Representatives and the state Senate that are led by Republicans, because unions, almost without exception, support Democrats. And in general, Republicans get more support from big businesses than Democrats do. So that's a whole nother level. A lot of people say it has nothing to do with money at all. It has all to do with political power and who's going to be in office 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now.
I can leave you with another fact of a group of union workers, mostly made up of women, and unions in the past have helped women in particular and minority populations get a living wage. But the International Garment Ladies Workers Union, if you haven't paid attention to that, they were the American women, primarily, who made our clothes. In 1965, 95% of your clothing was made in the United States. Do you have any idea how much is made today in the United States?
Less than 5.
5 or less percent. Go home today and look at the labels in your clothes. Just look at them, and you will be amazed that hardly anything is made in this country for what we wear. And I guess I'm calling attention to the workers around the world whose labor now is producing our clothing for this country and their conditions. 14 of them lost their lives, not unlike the Triangle Fire in 1911 in New York City, where 146 people lost their lives. 12 or 13 of them lost their lives in December of this year, jumping out of windows of locked factory working conditions where they were making clothes.
Yeah, it was almost the exact parallel of stories we're trying to show.
Absolutely.
I'd like to just add something to what Alan was saying, is that one of the most inspiring things to me about the Wisconsin labor movement is that in the regards to unions backing Republicans or Democrats, the police and fire union both backed Scott Walker on his governor's campaign. And after the collective bargaining rights were added to the financial bill that is planning to eliminate it, both of those unions sided, even though they were not going to be attacked, even though their collective bargaining rights were not going to be taken away, they both unions joined in the demonstrations because they realized that attack on one is attack on
And
all.
Sam, that also ties into Ann's point about the International Ladies Garment Workers, because most of the people being affected by these union cuts that are done by the states are women.
Right.
And there's a really good piece in yesterday's New York Times Week in Review that talks about they're mostly women. And thank goodness the men, who were mainly firemen and police people, did come forward, even though, and not by accident, their salaries are not being reduced, their rights to negotiate are not being reduced. And it's not by accident that they're men.
Yeah, these aren't coincidences. I mean, it's the same reason that we're all here today.
Again, this will probably be the last thing that I say, but, and I don't want to say that, I don't want anybody to think that, like, I'm out there saying we shouldn't have any collective bargaining rights and unions should be doing it. But one of the things is that unions right now are fighting for, to get people fair wages, insurance benefits, and rights. And one of the biggest arguments is that they don't have these same wages, rights, and insurance as public workers.
Private, right?
Well, private,
Yes,
sorry,
private.
I meant private workers. But exactly those people that you're comparing yourself to are people that don't belong to unions.
No, and actually, the Center for Local and National Governance, you can check that, it's a Center for Excellence in Local and State Governance, does a comparative study between professionals that are in unionized workforces and professionals with similar degrees that are in non-unionized workforces. And guess what? We're 6 to 7% less, even with our benefit packages,
Well, this is
than
what I'm trying to
professionals. So you have to compare
Right.
professionals to professionals.
That you're actually backing up my point. Is what I'm saying is that you're collective bargaining and fighting for something that people who are not collective bargaining and fighting for have. And there's sort of this thing that is it possible that they have this because they have this free market ability to say, oh, I don't want to work for Google because Microsoft's going to pay me more.
Are you talking about the people at Walmart, our nation's largest employer? Are you talking about them?
No. I'm talking about.
They don't have the same thing.
Right now, we're comparing, people that are
Professionals.
skilled workers or people, professionals with degrees.
No, but there's a class action in front of the Supreme Court right now on behalf of Walmart workers, in fact, women.
Yeah.
If it
Our
wins,
nation's budget is
things are
important.
going to change very quickly.
They're actually trying to decide whether or not they are a class. That's what's before the Supreme Court.
Also, one of the things I would point out about unions is that not too long ago, roughly in the early to mid 1970s, 1 out of every 4 workers in this country, irrespective of gender or anything else, 1 out of 4 were unionized. Today, it's less than 1 in 10, and most of those workers are public employees, so there's almost no unions left in the private sector. And it's not coincidental that the amassing of wealth, the distribution of wealth, as you said earlier, is hugely different. I mean, 400 of the wealthiest households in this country have more wealth than 152 million people. And 30 or 40 years ago, it was about a quarter of that. So the wealth was much more evenly distributed. And one of the roles that unions play is not only do they raise their own folks' salaries, but they also raise the salaries of private employees, because if you want to get Rose, who's really good, if the private person is only going to pay $10 an hour and the union is going to get paid $15, then the private people will raise their salaries. Why are so many people who are working today living in poverty? Because they're not getting paid very much money, whether it's Walmart or thousands and thousands of other employees.
Wasn't part of that, though, in the 70s, the age of corruption in unions, in which, well, for example, especially, and this is mostly manufacturing, in which you could not have a manufacturing job without being part of a union. You did not have that right to not be in a union. You didn't have the right to not pay dues, and the people at the top were the ones amassing the wealth and abusing the rights. And that was part of that was the downcline of unions in America, in which basically the busting up of...
No, the downfall of unions in America started with Ronald Reagan's very first act when he became president, was to break the air traffic controllers union. That was the beginning, at least, of the most recent downfall of unions. And let's remember, as a number of speakers point out, there weren't unions until the 1930s. Zero. There weren't weekends. People worked for pennies in the most horrific working conditions you can imagine.
It seems to me when people think of unions and they picture a gangster in a black Cadillac extorting money from workers, and the media has done their job really well. When I think of a union, I think of the people I work with, and I think of, working class families. That's why I don't think of a union. When other people think of, this corrupt gangster and stuff like, then I think the media did a really good job.
Well, no, that happened. I'm not saying that's true.
Certainly.
I'm saying in the 70s, that was the norm, not...
I was in unions in the 70s.
And I'm sure
My
you
union
But it's a
was,
particular perspective on it.
depending on where you worked. Mine comes from people,
Absolutely.
not just
That's why we're here.
people who worked in machinist shops who didn't have the choice. You wanted to work in that shop, you worked in that union.
Honestly, I think there's a third option, and now you guys are going to see how really radical I am. I see problems with unions, and history proves that America without unions is a horrible place. But there's got to be a third way. I mean, because wherever you have power over people, you have corruption. And that's what happens in unions with their heyday. And to me, this is just also logical. I was, for 10 years, I was married to one of the movers and shakers of collective copies in Amherst, worker home collectives. And to me, that's the solution. You get free market principles, but you also get the idea of workers tied to fruits of their labor. Everybody at collective copies owns their own home, they drive new cars, they have retirement packages. To me, it just makes sense. And that's a movement that's beginning to spread slowly. People are, oh, Marxism, but it really isn't. It isn't Marxism, it's different. Because it works in a capitalist economy, and that's kind of the model that I wish would take off. My ex-partner is now back in Louisiana, and she works with a lot of Katrina survivors, African Americans who are forming small worker-owned collective. She's rocking that whole program. That to me is the third option. I see problems with unions because of corruption. I see problems in America without unions. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think that there's a more balanced perspective about all of this. than what I heard today, which is okay. I get it. I'm in Massachusetts.
Thank you. And I think what I want to applaud Sam. This was a student event. This was a student-organized event. And I applaud you, Sam, for taking the initiative to do